Another morning in Tokyo, and another early start thanks to the time zones, though I was getting closer to being on a sensible sleep cycle again. To kill some time, I headed east on the Chusobo line against the rush hour traffic. Rush hour is a spectacle in its own right in Tokyo, and is something that needs to be experienced. It may not be a pleasant experience, but it will be an experience. The morning rush doesn't seem to be as bad, at least not out here, and in travelling away from central Tokyo, the train I was in was mostly empty until we got close to our destination of Chiba, a city on the east side of Tokyo Bay. There are some notable things about Chiba, such as its port tower, which has the illusion of appearing smaller the closer you get to it. Maybe because of the last few days in Tokyo I thought it looked bigger than it actually is. But other than the optical illusion tower, the actual reason I was going to Chiba was to see a suspended monorail. Japan is one of the few places in the world that somehow made monorails work and make sense, so there are a few systems in the country. The Chiba monorail is notable for being the longest suspended monorail in the world at 15.2 kilometers over its 2 lines. And for me, I found it was fun to have now visited the longest suspended monorail in the world, and the oldest when I visited Wuppertal in Germany, which is, in my head, its closest relation, other than the other Japanese systems based on the same system. The Chiba version, though, does swing a lot less than the Wuppertal one, which some could say takes the fun about it, but you still get the same experience of looking directly down at the city as you glide above it. With our monorail observed, it was time to head back to Tokyo. It was a 3-hour round trip to Chiba, which would be considered a satellite city of Tokyo. You get a real appreciation for the size for the Tokyo Bay conurbation, as it was still uninterrupted urban landscape between Chiba and where we had started in Osaka. 50 minutes later and we were at Tokyo Station, the busiest station in the world by daily departures with over 4,000 a day, and one of the grandest looking stations in Japan, as it's one of the few urban stations that still has its original style building. Though the building we see here was rebuilt after the original was destroyed in an air raid, but is generally in keeping with the original 1914 building. The Marunouchi entrance building is now a hotel, but the round concourses at either end are still the main west entrances for the JR platforms and the shopping area. The main level of the station features 22 platforms between conventional JR East lines and the Shinkansen lines on the east side of the station. The station is the 0 kilometer point for most of these lines, with a 0 marker at platform 1, which is for the Chu and Tokaido lines, and for the Tokaido Shinkansen, the original high-speed line. And then another is on the east side of the station, which is for the Tohoku and the other northern Shinkansen lines, which head north out of the station through a tunnel to Ueno. And if that wasn't enough, there are 3 underground stations, including the one we arrived at on the Keio line. Other than its convenient connections and access to the major business districts of Marunouchi and Ginza, it is directly next to the Imperial Palace, with Gyokodori leading directly from the station building to the palace entrance. This was when I met back up with Jimsf and we went for an explore of the Imperial Palace East Garden, which is the only part of the Imperial Palace complex that is regularly open to the public. The gardens were built around the defences and walls dating back to the Tokugawa shogunate, and the ruins of Edo Castle, which can still be seen here. The modern gardens were opened in 1968, and various signs around the garden show that the Emperor Emeritus had a significant interest in the garden and shaped its current appearance. South along the moat that surrounds the palace. The land from this point has mostly been reclaimed from Tokyo Bay, as hard as that is to imagine now, which made it relatively easy to use the water for defences. If you're interested, the actual entrance to the Imperial residence is on this side, well clear of the tourists admiring the gardens. Over near Yokohama, we found lunch in an Italian restaurant, or at least Italian tailored to Japanese tastes, which is not a criticism at all, and their lunch deal very much got our approval. Among the shops and restaurants in this area, we found what is apparently the largest full-size Godzilla statue in Japan, which is said to house the final script and storyboard from the original 1954 film. It is one of several Godzilla statues around Tokyo, as Tokyo, like any major city, does seem to have a fascination with destroying itself. We continued south towards Minato, which is surprisingly hilly, to get up close with one of Tokyo's most famous landmarks, the Tokyo Tower. Built in the 1950s, the tower is the symbol of the post-war boom and recovery of Japan. When it was completed, it was the highest freestanding tower in the world at 333 metres tall, at a time when most buildings in Tokyo were less than 30 metres. The design was clearly inspired by the Eiffel Tower, and is painted in its distinct red and white due to aviation laws at the time. There are 2 observation levels to the tower, the main deck, which is at a height of 150 metres and features 2 floors with large windows, a shop, cafe, Shinto shrine and floor windows that let you look down the legs of the tower. On your allocated time slot, you can cram yourself into the tiny lift that takes you to the top deck, which is 250 metres high. Here the audio guide gives you a 360-degree tour of the surroundings, and it's really from here that you can appreciate the size of the city, which stretches out as far as the eye can see. And you will get a lot of time to admire it, as because of the aforementioned tiny lift that can only fit 6 people in at a time, you're probably going to spend about 40 minutes up here, even if you immediately queue to get back down. So enjoy the view. As you can see, I went up in the evening, which I'm not sure is the ideal time in terms of spotting landmarks, but I actually preferred to see the lights of the city, and I was very much not complaining. The GoPro though, didn't really like it, but trust me, it looks spectacular. We spent the next day avoiding the rain on a shopping trip, more of that on the main channel video, but in the morning we did stop by the Akiba Shrine, which was only a short walk from our hotel. This shrine was originally in Akihabara, and gave that area its name, as the shrine was built to stop the spread of fires that regularly burnt down whole districts of Tokyo after a particularly bad fire in that district. The locals nicknamed the shrine Akiba, after the god that could control fire, and the area around the shrine became known as Akibagahara, which eventually became Akihabara. When Akihabara train station was built in 1888, the shrine was moved to its current location here in Taito. And that brings an end to the Tokyo part of the trip, as the next morning we were at Ueno Station to start our grand tour south. First stop, Yokohama. After being presented with the modern and clean Yokohama station, we immediately hopped on a local train to head to an industrial area in the Docklands. Now, apparently this sort of place doesn't exist in Japan, according to some people, who like to give the image of this immaculate pretty streets in picturesque towns. But this slightly run-down scruffy road with warehouses, buildings and slightly dodgy 7-Elevens was the reality check we needed to confirm that Japan is in fact a real place that real people live in and do real things. It's still cleaner than most English industrial estates though. The reason for the detour was to visit the original Nissan factory, which was opened here in 1935, not long after the company that would become Nissan had been reorganised from its parent companies. This would be their first factory with an assembly line and built cars and trucks until the factory was eventually dedicated to engine production as the company expanded. And they built a lot of engines, with the 40 millionth engine rolling off the line last year. A selection of new and old engines are proudly displayed in a small museum here in the original factory building, which gives the history of the company and specifically the Yokohama plant. And the garden outside features appropriate decorations made from engine components. They really like engines here. We headed back to central Yokohama to explore the more tourist-friendly Docklands, but first, a 17 Ice update. Okay. We have reconvened at another 17 Ice in Yokohama because it's been like 2 days since we've seen one for some reason. I'm not sure if we've seen this selection again. Most of it is the same.
I think we have.
Yeah, I think we have seen this one again. So what does that make? At least 3 that exist?
Yes, it'd be like the third variety, like 4 machines you've seen, I think.
Yeah. I can't remember the tiramisu one. But we've definitely seen these blue ones.
Yeah.
They've existed. Oh, so that has been the 17 ice update of today. Because at our going rate, we're only going to see one every 2 days. For some reason. Like, what happened to 17 ice? Thought we were buds. Now you've just deserted us. Okay, part 2 of the 17 ice update at Yokohama. Tiramisu, good. Raisin butter, good. And Jimsf gives approval for Satsuma Mandarin. I have no idea what a Satsuma is, but
It's just orange.
basically it's just orange. It looks what it is.
Yeah.
So we've approved at least 3 of these ice creams. We ate our ice cream next to the Nippon Maru, the former national sailing ship, which, other than its ceremonial role, had a very practical role in training mariners for many years before being retired and moored here next to the Yokohama Port Museum and the landmark Yokohama Tower, which overlooks this area of redeveloped docklands featuring amusements and cable cars. Remnants of the industrial past can be found at every corner, including along the Kishishamichi Promenade, which is a former railway line with 3 original bridges that were imported from New York. This was not unusual at the time when Japan was rapidly modernizing and imported many new technologies before they built up the home capability themselves. Yokohama was the first open port in the 19th century, and apart from the industrial remnants that this left, you can see clues to this past in the variety of architectural styles in the city, mainly from the residences or buildings associated with foreign governments or companies that traded with Japan through Yokohama. As a centre of innovation, Yokohama was also the place where the instant noodle was invented, and of course there is a museum for that too, where you can learn about the history of how the instant noodle was invented and how it ended up in a cup, as the originals were in plastic bags. If you want the TLDR to this story, it's because the Japanese didn't think Americans owned proper bowls for eating noodles, so they had to provide them. To be honest, the highlight here was the Ramen of the World food court, where lunch was a nice Thai dish, accompanied with a violently green soft drink that I'm still not sure what it was, but I liked it. We continued to meander along the seafront, finding pretty parks and possibly the most adventurous street performer we would find on the trip. Juggling fire is enough, but juggling fire while bouncing on a ladder? Yeah, that's really up, that's out there. 10 out of 10 for effort. On the whole, Yokohama had a distinct feel compared with central Tokyo, despite their proximity. Maybe a selection bias, but it felt very modern and livable. Not overcrowded or cramped, but not a desolate ghost town. It really was a pleasant place. I really liked Yokohama, even though we didn't do much here, other than wander around. We stayed the night in Shin Yokohama, a district that seems to have grown up around the Shinkansen station. I parted with some money and now had a new camera to go with the lens that I'd bought the day before in your actual, and I treated my new camera to a date with some ramen. And that truly wraps up our time in the Tokyo Bay Area, as tomorrow we would get on the Shinkansen and continue our trip south to Osaka. Okay. Which, that one?
Yeah, I don't think you've seen that.
No, I haven't seen that. That's a new one.
That one either.
I've maybe seen that.
Okay.
But that's definitely much rarer.
All these others I'm pretty sure I like.
Yeah, I think it is pretty consistent. Like, the top 2 rows you can get anywhere, and then below here changes. Though sparkles are pretty consistent, as well as raspberry and that orange one.
There's one that didn't have the orange.
Yeah, I think they're more consistent, but they're not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Anyway, that has been the 17 ice update. Yeah, continuing our adventure of vending machines, we have found a fresh orange juice, if it is even orange, is machine. Because who knows what it is in this part of the world? And it's basically oranges. Might actually be oranges.
Well, it says what I need.
Well, there you go.